Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Delusions of Grandeur. I'm your host, one of your hosts for tonight, and we are starting our January science fiction. Well, Forrest, what was our theme for this month?
Well, Dave, this month's our first theme for 2021 is Days of Future Past. Futuristic science fiction movies where the year they were set the year they were set have come and gone.
Awesome. And tonight's feature that everyone went on and watched is a 1985 film directed by Robert Zemeckis called Back to the Future. And I think this is a fairly classic film for everyone. And it's basically about a young kid who ends up accidentally getting sent back to the future, where he ends up having to go through some troubles, and
he gets sent into the past.
Yep.
He gets sent into the past, and he has to get back to the future.
Yep. 30 years into the past for him.
To 1955. So let us go to first impressions with everyone. How about you, Dustin? Why don't you tell us a little bit how you got involved with this film? Is this a first time watch for you?
Really?
Oh.
I don't remember the first time I saw this movie. Because this is a movie that you see early on in life at some point, and it just like stays with you. Like this is kind of like Jaws, in that everybody has seen it. So, not sure how to respond. I mean, I first saw like bits and pieces of it on TV, and I didn't know what the whole movie was. But before I was 10, I think I had managed to see the whole thing, and it's a great movie. It's one of the best movies ever made, probably. I think that's a safe assumption to make. I also know that they use this movie to teach setups and payoffs in film school, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's great. Like, I don't know what more could really be said about it until we start going into the details of why it's great. So, next.
Let's go over to you, Jake. Was this a first-time watch for you?
Definitely not. This was one of those 80s flicks that I actually did see back in the day. Probably in the 80s, although I could not say with anything approaching certainty when I first saw it. I do know that over the years, I have seen the third one the least. I know that very definitely. But other than that, it's hard to say. I feel like I had seen this one before the other two were released, but I really don't know. I know I've seen it several times. It is an excellent film. It is a film that definitely has a strong nostalgia bit to it, but it also does hold up reasonably well just coming to it years later. At least that's, from my perspective, it does. And I just thought it was really fun to kind of actually dive into the trilogy with a more kind of studying the whole thing mindset. Feel like I get a little more out of it this time. It was the first time I've seen it in a hot minute. I have the shiny DVD trilogy set that was like, I think the first major release of the trilogy on disc.
Mm-hmm.
And I just never got around to watching it for some reason. But now I finally did. I had an excuse to watch it. So that was good. But now I want to upgrade because the disc menus on this one are all weird and wonky, and I hear there are some fun bonus features on the Blu-ray. So one day.
Yeah, I have that. I have the flux. I have the flux capacitor Blu-ray set.
Though I do have to. I'm sorry. There was one exception to that. I did see the first and second ones again, and we'll talk more on this with the second one. But I did catch when they did the screenings on October, was it 26th or whatever, 2015. They did a back-to-back screening of the first two movies at my local theater. So I did do that, and that was fun. And it was pretty cool. And it is worth seeing on the big screen. Yeah.
Okay. Going over to you, Mo, why don't you tell us a little bit about your first experience with this film? Was this a first-time watch for you?
Oh, heck, no. I've definitely seen this one the most by far out of all of them. I vividly remember, like, begging to rent it at the library because I looked at the cover and because he's, like, looking at his watch or some shit, and I was like, whoa, that guy's watch must be awesome. And I just had to see the movie, you know? And it was worth it just renting it sight unseen like that because it was, I mean, I feel like if you see it at the right age, it is a fairly life-changing movie. Doc Brown is a crazy character. Old Marty, I think we can all relate to how weird it would be to go back in time and almost make out with your mom. So it just, you know, it still resonates to this day. I still find that weird as shit. It's just great, man. I mean, like, just dude, it's I would say saying it still holds up is kind of an understatement, actually. This movie almost feels to me like it hasn't aged much, which a lot of other movies from this time period that I have nostalgia for, yeah, they've aged for sure. Back to the Future, I fully feel like you could put this out tomorrow and it would still feel like a relatively new movie, you know? But that aside, you know, I always had a lot of fun with it over the years. I feel like I remember Doc Brown, like a cartoon version of him, was one of the Burger King mascots for a while, and like Geordi from Star Trek and a couple other people. I don't know, like a Ghostbuster or something like that. So yeah, it's just, you know, I grew up with it, love it. Still one that I revisit frequently. The other two, not so much.
Okay.
Not that there's anything wrong with them. Just, you know.
Hell no. Going over to Forrest, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience? Was this the first time watch for you?
Oh, hell no. This is one of my, I mean, this movie along with the sequels are, well, because I put them all together as basically one big movie, but it's in my top 10 movies of all time. I remember getting the VHS. I remember like going on the ride at Universal Studios Orlando as a kid, watching the cartoon. The movie itself, the first movie itself, I remember getting the VHS tape at McDonald's back when McDonald's sold videotapes. And it's one that I got to watch at least once or twice a year. My favorite, it's probably my favorite movie trilogy of all time. I mean, with this whole series, you've got like a beginning, a middle, and an end. With each movie. And like Mo was saying, Marty. I think a lot, all of us see ourselves in Marty, and just like and you got Doc. He's so this kooky but lovable eccentric. And then you got Biff, who's just a great you've got Biff and who's just a great, who is one of the greatest movie villains.
Yeah, Biff rules.
Yeah, he's such a
I'm a Marty, but I want to be a Biff. You know what
I mean? Fun fact: in the animated series, the villain is always Biff in some form or
another. Oh, yeah. I've been watching that series over recently, so.
Go on, Forrest. I cut you off.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, and then of course, I think for me is, for younger me, I'll admit, I do not. So my dad, and my nephew are some of the biggest car enthusiasts I know, but and I'll be honest, I don't really share their enthusiasm for cars. But the DeLorean is one car I wish I had.
Alrighty, going over
or at least those doors. Just put them on a Pinto, man. Those wing doors.
Going over to you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us, was this a first-time experience for you?
Oh, of course. I've never seen this movie or heard of it in my life. So, but I cannot remember when I first saw this film. I kind of remember when I saw the second one,
Mhm.
but for the first one, I don't remember. It could have been one of those films that they brought in when they would bring in the TV when the teacher wanted to just, give us the time off to do it. Maybe then, maybe I I know I didn't see it in theaters because my family really wasn't. We didn't splurge on that as an extravagance. Not that early on in my life because I was only like 5 or 6 when this came out. Um, it. But I know I saw it eventually. I just can't remember when. I remember this was probably the second most watched of the trilogy, and it was just kind of a fun thing. I enjoyed watching the cartoon as a child, but I only remembered the live action segments with Christopher Lloyd and Bill Nye, which is kind of funny. When I was rewatching the animated series, I was just like, "Is that Bill Nye?"
Yes, it
It was.
And
actually
it's just
doing those segments on that show is how he was able to get his own show.
That's right.
Oh,
And
a bit of history there.
that show was talk about childhood. Bill Nye was like that was the place to be.
Yep.
uh,
Well,
so
oh,
Back to the Future for me was I hold a lot of nostalgia for this film because this was the movie of the 80s to see, and I think it holds like Mo said, holds up to this day, that you could watch it tomorrow and it would like be a brand new
Yep.
movie, because it holds a lot of time capsule moments of the 80s to me.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure exactly when I first saw this film either, but I know that it was on TNT back to back, not always in the same order, not always among the same trilogy, but it was often a well played movie on TV networks for the longest time. But I also remember going to the Orlando, Florida ride and going and experiencing that, because you get inside like this like
DeLorean.
silver DeLorean machine, and they got this big screen, and I think what you end up doing is you end up like
Chase after Biff.
correct, and I think you also have a moment like when they first like get to the future, like you see some of the traffic that's going through that, and you end up becoming part of the adventure or whatnot, and that I remember specifically because the thing kind of slid around, and like you were sitting in a car like thing with other people, and it was just an enjoyable experience at the time. So not only was this movie memorable to me, it was also quotable, and I also think that they marketed the film extremely well. So to me, I do have a lot of nostalgia, and Doc, we don't have enough road to make it up to 88 miles an hour. Where we're
Roads
going, we don't
don't
need
need roads.
So,
Mhm.
Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about your first experience with this film? Was this a first time watch for you?
Definitely not. I actually remember very clearly my first time seeing this film. They were showing all three films on USA, which is owned by NBC Universal, and obviously this is a Universal film, so they were able to show it pretty readily. And it was on TV, and I remembered that my dad kind of sat us down to watch the first one, and he didn't let us watch the second one right away. He kind of had me wait until I was a few years older because it was kind of darker, and then part three, I watched them kind of out of order. I watched part three before I watched part two, but point being, I remembered watching it very clearly. I want to say it was like 1998, something like that. Like it's around that year. Like it was late 90s when that came about. And it was on TV, and I was a little kid, but like I loved it. I like really got into it, visibly got into it. And like to the point where like I was cheering when Marty like was like, "Oh, Biff, hey, what's that?" Turns around, smacks him. Yeah, I remember like, yeah, and so I was really, really into it. And it's one of those movies that is extremely formative. It is one of the best film trilogies ever. The first film script is probably one of the best film scripts ever written in terms of structure and in terms of characters and, like Justin said, planting and payoff and stuff. It's just a all around perfect script, pretty much. It has the unique distinction of being one of the iconic 80s films that is explicitly rooted in its time period, but also explicitly rooted in a time period that's 30 years earlier, to the point where you could easily say, oh, it's so dated, except guess what? It's not. It's about as timeless as could be, despite it ironically being set in very explicit time periods. And I think the reason why is because the themes are so universal, and as universal as Star Wars, how much they carry through to the generations. You don't have to have grown up in the 50s or the 80s in order to appreciate it. And I obviously was watching it in the late 90s for the first time with no knowledge of either of those decades, but I just adored it, and to this day it's ranks very highly up there as far as favorite films. It's one of those films that's pretty much impossible to dislike, as far as I can tell. And just a little historical note, the most viewed video on the channel that I'm on, Indie Horror Film Creative, the most viewed video is me unboxing this Amazon exclusive gift set of the 4K versions of the trilogy. But the first time Amazon shipped them to me, the box was indented horribly, and I rant at the camera for a few minutes, and that's still the most viewed video on the channel. But at least of the ones I've done. And then of course that's the set that comes with the hoverboard from part 2, which is actually just the same poles of two magnets repelling each other. That's how they achieve the effect. But it's really cool nonetheless.
You gotta
But
fill
yeah.
your sink up and recreate that scene fingerboard style where he goes across the water.
Yeah. Big fly, you bozo! Those boards don't work on water unless you got power. We'll save that for part 2. But yeah, it's a 11 out of 10 all the way around.
It's very easy to get lost in talking about the sequels.
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah.
But trying to keep it
But-
on task.
Let's take a look at the plot and some of the characters. So this movie stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, among other various actors and actresses. And Michael J. Fox, he's very young in this movie. What do you guys think?
Yeah, relatively.
Oh, I mean,
Wasn't he
I kinda
just
grew
coming
up
off
with
of-
him.
He's
Go
coming
ahead.
off
I
of
grew
Teen
up with
Wolf.
him on
Yeah,
his other like
Family Ties at the
film.
time.
And his TV show that he was on, if I recall
Yeah.
correctly, that was the one that
Family
he was
Ties.
Family Ties, yeah. Which
Yeah.
of course he was a jerk in that one, but
Yeah.
Young
a likable
Republican.
jerk. But he was still, there, and it was kind of cool having him play an average teenager, both in this and in Teen Wolf.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Both great films.
as some of us actually know, he was not the original person to have actually
Eric
been
Stoltz.
picked for the role. Eric Stoltz was.
Well, no, not even that. They had actually hired C. Thomas Howell, and I think he was like too tall or something, or the producers pushed for Stoltz. That's what it was.
But they shot a good chunk of the movie with Stoltz by
Yeah.
the time
Yeah,
Fox came forward.
right.
And Eric Stoltz, to be fair, like he did a really good job in The Fly too, where he played Martin Brundle, the son of Seth, and he also played the drug dealer in Pulp Fiction.
Funny enough. So if this movie if the movie if this mo- so in it, so Stoltz would have been playing Leah Thompson's son in this movie, but of course that didn't happen. But then a couple years after this came out, he played Leah Thompson's would-be love interest in All the Right Moves.
Yeah,
Right.
Kind of,
and he
So
was
he's
the
starring-
son in he was the
starring-
deformed son of Cher in Mask also.
Right.
but going
And
from
that's-
playing Leah Thompson's son to his would-be love interest, that's kind of jarring. Change.
Well,
So his
that
son.
happened. That happened with Tom Hanks and Sally Field. They were love interests in Punchline, and then they were mother and son in Forrest Gump.
It's also
So-
Zemeckis.
So ultimately, we have a young kid by the name of Marty McFly, who
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It wasn't all the right moves. It was Some Kind of Wonderful. That was the movie movie they did together. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Yeah.
But Marty McFly, he is kind of like the epitome of like the '80s
The
teenager.
epitome of the 80s teenager.
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, he wants to like star in like a band, and
Right.
he has a love interest of his life, and he seems to have a lot going for him. But he ends up having like a best friend in this older crazy scientist by the name of Doc Brown, and the very beginning of this, I always get a kick out of because you see all these clocks and this machine that Doc Brown has created, and ultimately you end up realizing that it's a what is it? A dog food maker?
He has like a Rube Goldberg contraption in his apartment, which is decorated all in clocks. That opens a can of dog food.
Mhm.
For
Well, it did some other
Einstein.
stuff too, like
The other thing that I noticed while I was rewatching this earlier is that if you realize one of the clocks on there has it's a black clock right next to another owl looking clock. That same clock was also in the kitchen of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
He looks the cat, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
yeah. That was
But-
that was a pretty popular clock design in its day, if I
Yep,
recall.
I got one.
And then we were talking earlier about how this one does a lot of setup and payoff and whatever. Apparently one of the clocks also is both a setup for the later part of the film and an homage to Harold Lloyd, because you got one with a dude hanging off of the clock.
Yeah.
I always
So
thought of the I don't know why, but I always thought of the clock tower at the courthouse to be that Harold Lloyd send off, you know?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely.
Mhm.
So ultimately, we get Marty. He's hooking up his guitar to this like big gigantic amp,
Mhm.
and he turns up the power, turns up the volume, and all he has to do is strum the guitar once, and he's blown out of his mind.
Mhm.
Spinal Taps that shit.
Yep.
Which might have been wasn't it in the 80s where they had that commercial where you basically got that dude blown away by the amps or whatever. I don't
Probably.
like was it Max well, not, I don't want to say Maxwell, is that right?
It started with an M, but I can't.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. The well, of course I always think of it as the was it The Simpsons where they did the sound check and then says the audience is now deaf?
Yeah, that was Tiny
That's what
Toons.
That was Tiny Toons.
Oh, Tiny Toons.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Although Bart did a sound test with a bunch of megaphones connected to one another, which got him sent to military school.
Well, someone mentioned Spinal Tap. It's like, well, part of the problem was that he didn't turn it up to 11.
Yeah.
You know, had he
Yeah.
turned it up to 11, then it probably would have been okay. But the fact that it wasn't, it displeased the metal gods, so
Yeah.
they blew it up.
You gotta pay
And-
Marty.
Yeah.
And I
Dork.
wonder if there was. I wonder if there was a Spinal Tap reference when I liked how they inserted Huey Lewis into the movie, and of course we will have to mention him a few times here. But he has that brief cameo as the judge who stands up and tells Marty, "You're just too loud."
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, was Huey Lewis in the News like a loud like band or
No.
something?
They
or-
were.
I don't think so, no.
They were.
They're like an easy listening band, right?
I wouldn't say
they were
easy listening. They're more like
80s
pop rock. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
It's the
weren't
shit
hard.
you could hear at
rock.
like a fairground without offending your mom's
Well,
level of decibels,
right.
you know?
Before we get into Huey Lewis in the news section, let's talk about the news report that we see before he even turns up the volume. Apparently, there is a news report that is going out about some missing plutonium, which kind of leads us to the phone call that Doc actually calls him about after he's, of course, let the darn thing overload. And he tells him to meet him at the Twin Pines Mall at 2:00, like that night or that morning or whatnot. And then, of course, all the clocks go off, and he's like, "Hey, are those my clocks I hear? Good.
Yeah.
They're exactly 25 minutes slow."
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that it's 8:25 precisely? Damn! I'm late for school.
Right.
That's
Did you
where we
notice
have
that the plutonium was just hiding right under the bed?
Yeah.
Perfect place to store your plutonium.
Which
Oh, yeah.
you gotta love how much visual information is communicated to the audience in just a series of moving shots like that. Like we
Right.
have a ton of really important information that is given to us very seamlessly.
Some of which Marty misses because it's clear
Yeah.
Doc's been gone for a while when he's in
Mhm.
there, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and for me, for someone who actually did skateboard for a little bit, I remember vehemently seeing Marty take a skateboard and pull himself by the cars just to get
Yeah,
himself.
skitching, the kids call it, you know? This movie definitely, I think it's like you could separate the generations of people by kids that got into skateboarding explicitly because of Tony Hawk Pro Skater, and then kids that are a little bit older and got into it because of this and Gleaming the Cube. And for sure, this was like it for me, you know?
Same here.
Yeah. Well, I think I tried a skateboard like once or twice, but I wasn't any good. But
Yeah.
yeah, I will say that this movie and especially Tony Hawk made skateboarding really look cool for a while, and then it kind of went away. But this definitely helped. And not
was
to
good at
mention,
falling.
besides even skateboarding, specifically something that I later learned was illegal, which is skitching, where he grabs onto the back of the car to catch a ride.
Mhm.
Most of the things you do on a skateboard are illegal, but that makes them more fun, dude.
Yeah.
You can't skateboard on the sidewalk. It's
Yeah.
Jeez, Mo, what were you doing on a skateboard?
Plenty of the stuff that you see in this movie for a time.
that was a
Ultimately, he gets to school, and of course, his girlfriend Jennifer, who is
Mhm.
kind of good looking, and yes, but she basically tries to shut him down a hallway so that he doesn't get his fourth tardy
In a row.
in a row. Of
Mhm.
course, Mr. Strickland is a little bit more smarter than most of his students, although
Mhm.
it seems like he is like the epitome of discipline, you know?
Yeah.
Epitome of discipline.
Yeah.
No, no McFly has ever made any
Amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. You're a
Well, history
slacker,
is gonna
just like your
change.
parents.
Which that whole exchange that they have, I think, is so excellent for their characterization, but it also is a perhaps not so subtle foreshadowing that yes, indeed, history is going to change in more ways than one. Although
Yeah.
one might even say that history changes even more radically than just the one movie, because obviously it got two more to change history even further. But yeah, that's such a defining character moment because it's what every generation has to come to grips with is what their parents and generation and what the grandparents and all that what they did or failed to do versus what they can do, and how much they believe in themselves to affect their destiny. And obviously, Marty McFly clearly has enough of an ambition and idea of what he can be and what he can do, but his crippling insecurity, as we know, is what happens after the audition where he's too damn loud. That it's like, this demo's good. You got to send it to the record company. He's like, I don't know, Jennifer. I just can't. You can't. What if they tell me that they don't like it? What if they tell me it's no good? I just can't take that kind of rejection, which of course
Jesus, I'm sounding like my old man here.
exactly, which is exactly what happened to George with his sci-fi books. So
Right.
it's but that just tells you about history can indeed repeat itself in good ways and bad ways.
Well, anyways, after that little conversation that he has with Jennifer, where she continues to maybe be like his sideline cheerleader, at least as far as the band is concerned. In the background is where we kind of get some of the foreshadowing that we see with the clock tower, where we have a lady that comes up to them and she's like, "Save the clock tower! Save the clock tower!"
Mayor Wilson is trying to replace that clock. 30 years ago, lightning struck the tower, and the clock hasn't run since.
Yeah. And this may be an unpopular opinion, but I personally would have supported fixing the clock.
I mean, I would have too, just because I not replace the physical clock, but probably would have replaced the existing clock.
Or at least make sure it's
make it functioning. Either way.
Yeah, I mean,
clock.
It's not even like it's a digital clock. I mean, it's mechanical, right? I mean, you can probably replace whatever fried, gears or whatever inside of that thing and make it run fine. That can't be that hard.
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I don't think a proper mechanical clock would break down because of a lightning strike, but that kind of destroys the big premise of the movie. I mean, it's gears and shit. There's nothing in there to fry. It's like a mechanical thing,
I guess because they make a point of how much energy is in a lightning bolt.
Yep.
So I guess if it's channeled correctly, if it caused something to superheat and weld together, maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I think there's a lightning rod on top of the clock tower in that picture, but again, it's one of those things. You just got to suspend the disbelief there a little bit. Like, all right, I'm gonna go with that.
Well, that's a pretty minor thing too, because I mean, it could have been just more than just the clock. There could have been other internal components that might have gotten damaged, and who knows? I mean, Hill Valley is a small town. They probably barely have enough funds to do basic things, and they probably had to. This was 1985. By the time that modern times roll around, they've probably cut all the music classes and stuff. So I mean,
look at the town square. There in 1985. There's graffiti everywhere.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Oh yeah, it's very run down.
Yeah,
those skater kids tagging it up.
Well, ultimately, we learn that Marty has kind of a weekend planned with his girlfriend, and his mother and father don't really know about the entirety of the plans, but he ends up he basically wants to plan a camping trip using the family's car. Well, he gets home and guess who's totaled the car?
Biff. I can't believe that you loaned me a car without telling me that it had a blind spot. I could have been killed.
Look at this. There's beer everywhere.
I towed the car all the way to your house, and all you have for me is a light beer?
I mean,
now, Biff,
fair complaint,
I didn't know of any blind spot when I would drive it. Hi, son. What are you, deaf, McFly? Why don't you explain that wreck out there?
If only
I
he had a
explain
sport
it
of
because
rats.
you were drinking while you were driving, and you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
this is our
ultimately,
introduction to Biff.
well,
Oh
it's
yeah.
also an introduction to Marty's family a
Yeah.
little bit later on because evidently it ends
His
up
dad's
being.
a weakling, and his mom's on the sauce.
Yeah.
And his brother, his
You
brother, his
can-
brother flips burgers.
Well, and
You can-
apparently it's their Uncle Joey's birthday,
Yeah.
and he's
Yeah.
in the slammer.
His release from prison. It was his. He was supposed to be
His
making parole.
Parole. Yeah. We're gonna have to eat this ourselves, kids. Your Uncle Joey didn't make parole again. Uncle Jailbird Joey, he's your brother, Mom.
And of course, Marty's brother Dave, if I remember correctly,
Mhm.
that was
Yeah.
his name.
Yep,
Yeah.
Dave.
He was working for a food company, and his sister was like in some sweater get up, and she looked
Yeah.
like she that was the only thing that she had on. That whole sweater that like came down past her.
I just remember the
legs.
rollers.
Dave
Uh,
works at McDonald's. That's what the outfit that he
Oh,
has.
actually,
Yeah.
it was Burger. Actually, it was Burger King because
Yeah, I thought it was.
It
Burger.
was?
yeah, if you
Yeah,
have
it was
a
Burger
Burger King
King.
uniform, plus if you look around Doc's garage at the beginning,
know-
there's Burger King wrappers everywhere.
And
And
that's
did you notice
that's- Go ahead.
Burger King and Pepsi, especially Pepsi Free, which
Yep.
at
yeah.
the time was caffeine-free diet Pepsi.
God,
Yeah.
I thought to myself, what kind of terrible childhood
Yeah.
that he was
Well-
the best he could do with caffeine-free diet Pepsi.
Well,
Ugh.
he
It's all that
also he
drinking his mom
also
does, man. He's trying to be
Well, you
healthy,
also-
you know.
he
Not
also
to mention
noticed
all the free advertisement from all the different places. I mean, even J.C. Penney's got some free advertisement at the time.
Bank of
yeah,
America,
there's-
Toys R Us.
Well-
there's product placement out the wazoo in this thing, but it all
Mexico.
it's not like it's out the wazoo, but it's also very realistic. Like you could totally believe that they would be saying those things in that moment.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's all good. But like you are right with the Pepsi free thing, but he also mentions Tab, so like I assume he
Yep.
means Tab Clear,
He's
which
like all
was
into diet drinks.
yeah.
Tab, Tab is a terrible drink.
Well, I assume
Die.
Did.
I assume that he's doing that because, well, A, those were popular at the time, but B, you could even make the assumption that because he's seen what his family has amounted to, that
Right.
perhaps that's his attempt to not be like them on a subtle level.
Maybe he's diabetic,
so
you know.
good.
We don't know that he's not
Right.
checking the blood sugar every so
Which-
often.
Now,
Good
actually,
point.
speaking of subtle characterization moments, something that I think was in earlier drafts of the script, if I recall, or at least part of the backstory or something that didn't make it into the final trilogy but is important. People have asked how Marty and Doc Brown knew each other because they kind of lived separate lives, largely outside of them, doing stuff together. But it's like, how on earth would these two people know each other? Well, apparently, I think it was Marty when he was younger was like snooping around his lab when he wasn't supposed
Yes.
to. And instead of like turning him in or something, Doc Brown befriended the boy and they became good friends. And it really, truthfully, like the best part of the whole series, I think, is the completely archetypical young King Arthur and Merlin relationship that they have, master and apprentice. And
Mhm.
their ways of having met each other are totally young King Arthur and Merlin. And but that's
And
again that's an
Einstein
important
is Archimedes.
yes, exactly. But that's an important thing to establish because again, it shows that he's being shown a world that's outside of the one that he knows, and he's learning these mysterious ways that he doesn't fully understand. But he's doing it to try to not repeat the past, even though some things about his personality he gets from his dad.
His parents are
Right.
kind of losers, and he doesn't want to end up like that.
Exactly.
Right.
Like,
And
he
they're
kind of
And
spends
actually,
time away
that's
from them.
that's part of the narrative thrust behind the whole film in the first place. Supposedly, the film was inspired by Bob Gale thinking to himself, like, what would my dad have been like when he was my age? Would we have been friends? That sort of, or when I was a teen, like would we, if I knew him, as a teen when I was a teen, would we have been friends? And so it's an interesting concept. Of course, he goes back and meets his parents when they're his age, but they
Yeah.
definitely set it up in that first scene with his mom going on about how people didn't do those kind of things when she was younger and all that kind of
All the
stuff.
boys.
Girls
And-
chasing boys. When I was your age, I never kissed a boy or called a
Right.
boy or sat
a
in a
boy.
parked car with a boy.
Bush.
Yeah, we
Wow.
find out that she's a big fat liar.
Yeah, actually, I read an interesting a quote from her where she said that she was advised from her, I think she said she was advised by her agent that basically all the roles in Hollywood for her were as a virgin, a whore, or a mother. And she got to play them all in one movie, so she enjoyed that thoroughly.
Yeah. Which, I mean, she's a highly underrated actress, I think.
Yeah.
And I have to also, one aspect of the movie that does not get praised enough is actually the makeup department, because the way that they make the parents look when they're in the original 1985 timeline versus the 1955 when they're young versus the revised good 1985 timeline versus the
Oh, yeah.
alternate timeline that we'll get to in part
2015.
2. Yeah, like the makeup department, they did a great job with aging them up, and like they look very convincing, and
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're able to play those characters at different ages, I think, pretty and different realities, very convincingly. So that's major props there. But it does always. This is a movie that oftentimes with time travel films, or TV shows, whatever. Generally speaking, they tend to fall into one of two. And now it's actually one of three. Now that I think about it, one of three possible theories. One of which is the theory that this movie follows, which is you can change time if you were to go back. You can change, your present, your past, your future, all that. The second one is like what Lost was trying to argue, which was what happened happened, and so if you went back, you were always meant to go back in time. And then the third one, which the part 2 actually gets into a little bit, which is the idea that every time you go back in time or alter the timeline, you just create a new timeline from that.
Yeah, it gets pretty confusing pretty quick.
It
Right.
does,
So-
but
There's another one I think where if you go back in time, you can't really touch any of what's going on because
Yeah.
it's already happened too.
Or Terminator, where you
Butterfly effect.
Terminator, where you delay the inevitable.
yeah,
Or like
exactly.
A Christmas Carol. These are things that are past. You
Or
cannot.
things that might be,
Yep.
Well, but still, this is like, as far as time travel in movies go, I think Back to the Future is a good kind of basic unit of measurement, and then you can get more complex with other things. But this is just a good, like, that's what's so surprising about this on a script level, is how well it works, how easy it is to follow, despite the fact that generally speaking, time travel films and movies can get confusing really fast, but this keeps it nice and simple, and there's like clear causes and effects for when things do or don't happen, and the direct things that do or don't happen in the future and all that stuff. So major
So-
props for taking this concept that could have gone off the rails and making it pretty easy to follow.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So ultimately, Marty ends up meeting Doc down at Twin Pines Mall, where he ends up videotaping the progress of Doc Brown's newest invention, which just so happens to be a time machine that was built out of a DeLorean.
Well, the way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine, why not give it some style? And I'm like, yeah,
Exactly.
damn straight, man. Because
Doesn't he
the
say there's some like used pinball parts in there too?
No, but that was the terrorist bomb.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Well,
Yeah, that's the thing that they kind of edit out of the TV version nowadays.
Yeah.
Because there's a subplot with, it
The-
runs on
the
plutonium.
9/11.
How'd you get plutonium? The
The-
Bolivian
the-
nationals wanted me to build them a bomb, so instead I
Yeah.
gave them a shoddy.
That's why I have this.
I think part of what makes this film somewhat comical is because Marty is like parroting everything that Doc says.
Yeah.
He's like, "Are you telling me you built a time machine on a
Oh,
DeLorean?"
DeLorean? Yeah. Well, but that's actually good screenwriting because you're able to get the technobabble from the doc, and then he's able to kind of simplify it for himself, but also for the audience. But also, it's not artificial. Like you really believe that he's just trying to wrap his brain around this thing that seems impossible. And it's like, Doc, you don't just walk into a store and buy a plutonium. Did you rip that off? Well, and then the funny part is later on, 1955 Doc, the younger Doc, actually kind of echoes that point that, I'm sure in 1985 plutonium is available at every corner drugstore, but in 1955 it's a little hard to come by.
Right. Well, I like the Doc does, and actually that was a pretty good example. The Doc does have the ability to cut right through the technobabble and give pretty great direct lines as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
of course, he has that great one that probably does get edited out of the TV broadcast, where he's first showing it off to Marty, and he's like, "If my calculations are correct, when this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're going to see some serious
shit. Yeah. Yeah, they do have to edit that out. Which, now, the nice thing with this movie being written the way it is that there's not a whole lot in it that's not necessarily family friendly. Like, I watched this when I was a kid just fine, and I would be perfectly comfortable showing this to a kid. I think they would love it. And it's got obviously a lot of elements in it that would go right over a child's head that the parents are like chuckling to themselves because it's like it's explicitly Oedipal with the incest themes and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a while to wrap your head around that because as a kid I was like, "Damn, she's cute," Then later on, it's like, "Oh man."
Yeah,
It's that certain age where it finally hits you.
Yep.
And you understand that look of creeping horror in Marty's face for most of those scenes.
It's like the Mark Hamill and it's like the Luke and Leia kiss. When you see that as a kid, you're like, "Score," and then later on, it's like, ugh.
Oh, and she even comments, "It's like kissing my brother," and that kind of turn off for her as well.
Well, I do like we're jumping ahead, but like that is a really good screenwriting touch because it's this idea that there's something about what's going on that is not only wrong, but it's even more than that. It's like there's some connection between them that can't be explained, and yet they both just kind of know it. And obviously it's because, well, they're familial relations, but I think that's just a good touch, and I like that idea that they both sense it, but they can't really, well, she can't explain it, obviously.
Well, anyways, while he's filming the video documentary of his a successful invention, he mentions exactly what kind of power powers the DeLorean, which is a powerage of 1.21 gigawatts.
No. This sucker's electrical, but I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity I need.
What the hell is gigawatt?
But and then of course the
unfortunately
Libyans.
the Libyans show up.
Yeah.
And machine gun Doc Brown. And
Which
Marty's forced
ends
to
up
jump in the time
making
machine
Marty-
to try to escape.
Yep.
And he inadvertently uses it to travel back to 1955.
Well, and the timage was blinking like from one to the other. I thought that was kind of interesting. Blink, blink, blink.
Yeah. Well, that one important thing about this that I had to wrap my brain around when I was a kid that was, again, very important is that the DeLorean, even after it gets a hover conversion in 2015, even then, it is only a time machine. It is not a time and space machine. So it's like you cannot go back in time to another end of the galaxy or something.
It has
like
limitations.
it's like it's not the Starship Enterprise. It's like so that's why when he goes back in time, when he's in the parking lot of Twin Pines Mall, he ends up in the middle of a cornfield because that's all that there was. Yeah, and that's brilliantly set up. I remember when this was all open land as far as the eye could see. Old
Did
Man
anybody-
Peabody.
Man, Peabody. Yeah.
And
Such a
his
good name
strange
for a
idea
farmer,
about
man.
of
breeding
breeding
pine
pine
trees.
trees. Yep. But again,
there's
that's
a cool
important
thing
though, because if you were to travel back in time and if you weren't careful, you could totally smash into a tree
So,
or like
there's a cool thing
materialize
that I
in a tree.
noticed
Good.
that ties into the end of the movie.
Mhm.
When Marty goes back in time, he runs
Yep.
over
Mhm.
one of the pine trees,
Right.
and
it
then
becomes
in
Lone
the
Pine
in
Mall.
new 1985, it's
Right.
called Lone Pine Mall.
Yep.
That's right.
Right.
That's it's a subtle thing, but
Mm.
the what's funny is like I remembered seeing that in like a YouTube video or so, or like one of those things you didn't know about a movie lists, and they were
Right.
pointing that out, and I was like, I noticed that the first time that I watched it. Why is that new? You know, but
Yeah, I
it's
noticed it too, and I was really proud of it.
yeah, I noticed it when I was young, but it's not like it's overly subtle. Like it's subtle, but it's like it's also kind of in the center of the frame too. But again, it's a small little hint that things aren't the same, which again is a very good touch. But that's the
Before
thing.
we
Like
move on,
if you were to time
What was
travel,
that, Mo?
if you weren't careful, you'd totally materialize into a tree or run into
oh
one.
yeah, it's like the
Whatever.
hyperspace idea. You'd end up in a fucking planet or something
Yeah.
if you don't
Exactly.
calculate it right.
Gotta be
I think it's not really relevant to the movie, but I think it's funny that in reality nowadays, most existing DeLoreans don't run well enough to hit 88 miles per hour.
No,
so-
they don't. Well, and actually, what they
Not even
did,
back then.
what they did with this film, actually,
Mhm.
because exactly what you said, most real like DeLoreans from that time period, because they actually do make new DeLoreans on demand. Like they're not a mass market thing, but they do make new ones that are exactly the same as the old ones. But the ones that were made at that time, you're right, they did not run very well, and that's kind of what killed the brand. But what they did for this film was they actually replaced the engine with a Corvette engine.
They
There you
also,
go.
I had read that they also, you're talking about the speed. The speedometer didn't even go that high in a DeLorean. They had a custom speedometer because it didn't
This is
even
just
go
getting
that
better.
high. So
Well,
yeah,
making alterations for the time machine. There you go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
Wow.
just a futuristic junk box. I mean, I guess they're hard to restore DeLoreans, you know.
Yeah. Well, they're also highly collectible, even aside from the movie. It's like they're
Right.
highly specialized cars.
You got
Companies
people
Highly.
that
say
love their
highly
rare
flammable.
cars.
Oh, I
Yeah,
know.
there's-
Their CEO got in huge trouble with the feds
Mhm.
for coke.
I
In
think
any
that's what you're
case.
supposed to do as a CEO back then, man.
Yeah.
You know?
But and also the movie is not only littered with those, again, it's littered as well with pop culture touches and random nods. And one that I didn't necessarily notice right away, but when I read about it, I was like, oh, that's pretty fun. Is that again, the farmer's name is Mr. Peabody, and apparently his kid who tells him it's an alien spacecraft is named Sherman. And I'm like, that can't be that was definitely not an accident. And I appreciated that little bit there.
Yeah, that's a good
Quick,
touch.
he's mutating into to human form.
Shoot it.
Shoot it.
Yeah.
No, did he? I think he said he's already mutated.
Yeah.
That was funny.
That was
Yeah.
funny.
And
Which
apparently they wanted to bring Peabody back. Like he went, they thought he was nuts and he was in an institution. He saw the DeLorean again and shot at it, but they didn't do it for budget reasons. But
mhm.
that would have been fun. But
Well, I do like the fact that Marty, like, it's like, just get a grip and fly. It's all a dream, a very, very intense dream. And of course, it's not. And he's like freaking the fuck out, like, oh fuck,
Huh.
And yeah, kitty. You can tell how relatively lightweight the DeLorean is because I think it is a relatively lightweight car because it was mostly the aluminum plating or whatever.
Well, yeah, and of course he was
'Cause-
flying behind the Lions estate sign there. It looked like he was sliding it very easily behind.
Yeah,
it.
that's what I mean. Is I think it was and I do think that's true. It was a fairly lightweight car.
It's just mostly Pepsi free cans that it's made
yeah.
out of, you know.
Well, and that's that was a point that they brought up in part 2. Was like Marty, he's in a 46 Ford, we're in a DeLorean, he'd rip through us like we were tinfoil, which that is true that older cars were much heavier, relatively speaking.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
In any case, Marty gets to town and he ends up going to the local cafe. Of course, he is stumbling around because he doesn't even believe his eyes while he's going to that.
Doesn't he meet up with 1955 Doc Brown first?
No, not for a while.
Not for a while.
Oh, right. He has to go get the phone book.
Well,
plus he meet his pops.
Yeah, he does go into the diner first, and that's where he gets the phone book, and that's also where he gets he goes to the counter, and I'd like a Pepsi free. You want a Pepsi, kid? You're gonna have to pay for it.
Yeah. When he's got to meet janitor Goby Wilson, who becomes Mayor Goby Wilson 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and he meets Biff for the very first time as a young Biff, and then he chases after his pops, who ends up being peeping Tom for a lady taking off her brassiere across the street. He's like, Pops a peeping Tom.
Actually,
there was the line before then.
More setup.
What?
I said that was more setup because earlier in the movie his mom asked him what was he doing bird watching.
Yeah.
He was
the raid. What?
What are you doing, Spirit?
It is so hard to not do this movie like totally play by play because it's just all good quality content.
Indeed.
Oh, we forgot with Biff. What are you looking at, butthead? Which of course gets reiterated in the first encounter with young Biff.
He's wearing a life preserver. He thinks he's gonna drown.
Exactly.
And they noticed that they in the animated series they always try to have an iteration of every version of Biff using the word butthead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which now one thing
that cartoon is insane. There's a Biff dinosaur.
Oh wow!
I'm about it. I need it.
But now the jacket that he has on, is that just like? Because I have one of those kind of puffier vests. I assume it's not actually a life preserver. I guess it was just a new
you'll
fashion
sink like a
thing.
rock if that thing gets wet.
Yeah,
it's just like a down vest. I have a Swiss gear one that I just got recently. It's basically the same.
I figured that's what it was. Because they always call it a life preserver in the movie, but I knew it wasn't. That wasn't it.
It's a goose down jacket.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure what the official name was, but yeah, the butthead motif got introduced with adult Biff, but it gets reinforced with teenage Biff, and you see spineless George McFly, and all of those things that
basically his father falls from the tree, and he pushes him out of the way. He gets hit by his grandfather's car, and he ends up in purple underwear in his mother's bedroom.
Right.
Yeah, he already had the
Yes.
Calvin Klein underwear on there.
Yep.
And so they thought his name was Calvin Klein when they looked at the underwear.
Because apparently that was a thing back then.
And why one would wear purple underwear, I do not know. But
and of course, then we get the whole Marty trying to explain what a rerun is.
Yeah, and that's
they were
is that
watching
the
the same
Honeymooners
show.
that they're watching?
Honeymooners.
Yeah.
It's the same show his father was kind of laughing at. And one thing that they had shown earlier on when they were showing that episode, and he's laughing and kind of looking dorky as all get out.
Oh yeah.
You could see, of course, the story that the wife was telling about them getting together. That there's still that spark there, but there's definitely something missing. And it's interesting to see that, especially when you contrast it to the alternate timeline. But it is cool to see that exact same episode playing. Yeah. And he's like, "Yeah, I love this one." And he's like,
it's a sci-fi themed one too.
Yeah.
I
love the grandfather. As soon as Marty leaves, he's like, "You ever have a kid like that? I'll disown you."
He's a very strange young man.
He's
an idiot. Comes from upbringing. Parents are probably idiots too. Lorraine, if you have a kid who acts that way, I'll disown you.
Right. And then
Love it.
there was also a good moment before that during the dinner scene. You got the kid in the crib. So you're my
Yes,
Uncle
Uncle
Joey.
Joey.
Better get used to these bars, kid.
Well, we've already been on for quite a while.
Oh, we have.
So I think we should try to keep it to 90 minutes. So let's pick up the pace.
All right.
So he meets Doc. Then he goes to meet Doc Brown, and he has to convince him that, oh, I came back here in a time machine you built.
Right.
And I kind of like the little moment where Dr. Brown sees the time machine and he's all excited. I finally invent something that works.
Right. Yeah, because he had that weird head contraption where he was trying to read Marty's mind. And it's interesting because you're introduced to Doc Brown as someone who, well, he invented the time machine. He must have some skill as an inventor. But then you see this old one, you're like, oh, well, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Well,
do you know what this means? It means that this damn thing doesn't work at all.
and then of course, Marty's trying to tell him about his trying to prove to him that he's from the future with his driver's license and showing him a picture of his brother, and he's like, that's not that could be a photographic whatchamacallit? Your brother's hair is missing.
Well, tell me, future boy, who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, the actor? Well, who's vice president? Jerry Lewis?
Yeah, there's a really tired Family Guy joke where they have Ronald Reagan, the actor? Peter, you already know that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Seth MacFarlane rips off this movie big time.
Well, yeah, he does repeatedly, but it's I did like the fact supposedly Reagan really liked the joke. Supposedly there was a cringe because it was you were not supposed to mention his ex-wife in the White House when the film came out. So when they mentioned her, it was an awkward moment. But otherwise, he liked the movie, and they almost got him for the third movie, but he couldn't do it for whatever reason. It may have been his
cognitive decline.
Yeah.
But
But
and to be fair, once you actually become president, then almost all of the time your availability to do pretty much anything outside of strictly ex-presidential activities goes down. Like it
would be tricky, in to put it mildly.
That you just don't see that happening.
It would have been an interesting cameo, but
it would have,
ultimately, after that, they end up going and retrieving the time machine because Marty is able to relate to him that he's told him about the incident that he fell on his toilet and came up with the time flux capacitor. So they end up
that makes the time machine work.
Yep, they end up retrieving the vehicle, and of course, once they do retrieve it. Ultimately, that's when Doc finds out that he's evidently bumped into his father and mother, and he's
accidentally interrupted the first meeting of his parents and put his existence in jeopardy. And so the rest of the movie, Marty has two things to do. He's got to matchmake his parents back together, and he has to wait for. So the time machine, they don't have plutonium to power it, so they have to wait for. Doc Brown makes the comment, the only thing capable of producing that much electricity in 1955 is a bolt of lightning. Yeah, it's like, well, we know where one's going to strike.
Yeah, that's right. So, which
I think he has the flyer the lady gave him that he shows to Doc, like, boom, right there. You know?
Which, again, such brilliant writing there that you've got a clear, despite it being time travel, you have a clear ticking clock, quite literally, ticking clock. You have very high stakes, and you've got, clear tension, drama, all that. Yeah. The only thing that is a little bit odd when you think about it in the context of time travel, so you've got the idea that his brother's head's gone, been erased from existence, and that different parts of them, that they start to fade away. So, in the logic of the way that they explain time travel in this movie, I assume that is meant to imply that the probability that his brother will exist is decreasing over time. Like it could still happen, but it's just the probability is decreasing.
I mean, the scene later with his hand when he's playing the guitar, I like to think that his brother is just sitting there in the future without a head. That's what I'm going with.
Well, and it is also worth noting that like he not only has those twin things that Dustin mentioned, but the matchmaking part of it is not easy because he's got to get his father, who's a retiring wallflower with zero self-confidence, and his mother is completely infatuated with him, and hot to trot as well. And it's
Isn't
kind
he a
of
dreamboat?
Yeah.
So the way they explain it is, so originally her dad hit her dad hit George McFly with the car, and she fell in love with him like out of pity.
Nightingale. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when he got hit instead, she kind of latched onto him. So
yeah, they explicitly call it the Florence Nightingale effect.
Well, and again, she clearly was very repressed and very hot to try, and she probably would have gone for anyone who got pulled into the house.
Except for Biff, of course.
Especially if they're wearing exotic purple
Biff.
undies,
Yep.
Well,
yeah.
And Biff is like the epitome of the bully.
Epitome.
I mean, to me, whenever I think of a bully, I think of Biff because
he's awesome.
Does know how to get under your skin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's so dumb too. Make like a tree and get out of here.
Butthead.
Yeah.
It's make like a tree and leave. You sound like a damn fool when you say it.
That's the
good fashion sense back in the day, though. I like the way like Biff's whole outfit is like cool to me when we first meet him in the past.
I love this. I love the scene in between school bells when Doc and Marty are talking, and he's explaining that that because of what all happened, that she's going after him instead of your father. Wait, are you telling me that my mom has got the hots for me? Precisely. Wow, this is heavy. There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
Yeah.
Well, and then you have Doc saying things like serious shit later on in his life, meaning like I always take that as he probably picked up different phrases from Marty hanging out with him later.
Yeah,
because in 1955, he would say things like he saw the poster for the dance. Look, there's a rhythmic ceremonial ritual coming up.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and again, that sets up very clear stakes, a very clear timeline of what has to happen by what time, and of course they got to get the DeLorean back in semi-working order to try to get the wire thing to connect to the power line to connect at the precise moment when the lightning strikes to send the electricity into the flux capacitor, all that stuff. A lot of stuff has to happen all at one time.
And of course, to get his father into the whole mix, he basically dresses up in that
he
uniform.
puts on the radiation suit that Doc Brown said that he was wearing when he went back.
Yep.
Swords, Earthling. My name is Darth Vader. I am an extraterrestrial from the planet Vulcan. Well, Darth Vader came down from planet Vulcan and told me that if I didn't hook up with the rain, that he'd melt my brain.
Right.
All right.
Well,
let's
keep that melting brains to ourselves for right now. This movie, and I think ultimately the second movie and the third movie were all so damn quotable.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta try to stop doing that. We're gonna spoil the entire thing.
Right. Spoilers, folks.
I would hope people would have seen it by now, but they're listening to us.
There is nothing wrong with spoiling a movie, just so long as you know we're doing it.
Right. So yeah, so they go to the dance, of course.
Well, they have to do a lot of trying to get George to nut
Yeah.
up, basically,
Well,
and
yeah.
he doesn't really do a great job of that at first. It
Well,
takes
and I
him a
think
long
it's
time to.
because of this whole brain melting thing that George gets his balls to knock out Biff later on. So
Well, again, it takes him a while to get there, and he has to really work himself up to get there because, you know, he has to work up the nerve to actually say to Biff, no, Biff, you leave her alone. And, again, I don't know, he just has to dig down deep. And that's part of what makes that whole scene really powerful is that, yeah, Marty helped to get him there, but he had to be the one to make the choice. And then
Mhm.
during that moment where it looks like he's going to backtrack and leave Lorraine on the dance floor, he goes back and he's like, excuse me. And he, pushes the kid down. And it's like, yeah, he's not letting some
and that
other interloper get in there.
and that redheaded kid for a moment looked like Carrot Top for a moment, a very young Carrot Top, but I don't think that was him.
But I mean, that's a big deal for him. And, it's, there's so many classic scenes on the way there, but I think the one that it's one of those scenes that's not really all that necessary in the narrative, other than perhaps giving more stress to Doc asking, "Dad, where is that kid?" And he has to look at the three watches.
There,
Yeah, like I'm thinking of the Johnny Be Good scene because it's like that really
All
is
right.
only there for like a little
Yeah.
comic relief after the stress of Marty suddenly ceasing to exist. But again, it
Let's talk about
also,
that. Let's talk about that scene.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Unintentionally problematic, because they're super progressive with Mayor Goldie, but then they ruin it by having a white guy invent rock and roll. Like, how the hell does that happen?
By the time,
How do you
Yeah.
overlook something like that?
by the time though that Marvin gets Chuck on the phone, he's already moved on from playing Johnny Be Good to go to playing basically Van Halen.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Which
he didn't quite entirely appropriate it.
Well, the
No, yeah,
what's
it's
really
clearly not intentional. They're not trying to say a white dude invented rock and roll. They just did it, It
well,
just happened that way.
it's just
Because he's like,
well, and
that new sound you were looking for? Check this
well,
out,
listen to
And
this.
it's
Listen
like,
to
Well, and then
this.
and the best part of the whole thing, I think, is well, not only do you have that, the Marvin, your cousin Marvin Berry. Not only do they have that, but then the fact of the matter is he's doing all of these Van Halen-ish things on top of this classic oldies rock and roll song. And the fact of the matter is that these kids don't like it at all. Like they're
Yeah,
like, what
they're
the
like,
Well,
what the
fuck?
hell?
not just Van Halen. He name checks about half dozen different major rock acts in there, and and then Wales on the guitar with the Jimi Hendrix little solo there, and
Yeah.
yeah, and he's like, I guess y'all
I
weren't
guess
ready.
you guys aren't ready for that yet, but your
Kids
kids are
won't
gonna
love
love
Kids
it.
love it.
there is one thing I wanted to mention that we have also here a very a young Billy Zane here as Match.
First role, I believe.
Well, before we move on from the problematic issue of that, they do kind of rectify it by having the African American band like just pretty much mess up those dudes that are being racist,
Oh, I know.
So
Well,
it's tempered, it's very unintentional.
Well,
It was
yeah,
just supposed to be a cool moment, but if you read into it, it's kind of like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
well,
whoops.
the
Guess that's why time travel's dangerous,
let's not forget the besides Johnny Be Good there, we have the song that I mean this has killer song after killer song besides just the
Earth
great
Angel.
score, which yeah, I was gonna say Earth Angel is just that song always stuck out to me as like one of the best in the whole movie, and again performed beautifully.
Right.
Oh yeah, and then of course we get the final moment where Marty has to scramble to get back to the time machine and gets into the time machine, and of course the darn thing won't start. Meanwhile, Doc is trying to put the rest of it together, and part of it gets stuck on a branch, and
He's trying to
you're not
connect
sure.
He's trying to connect the wires, and basically everything that could happen to build tension happens.
Yep.
I know.
Like the car
That
won't start. The thing
talk
becomes
about
disconnected.
talk about a nail biter of a climax. despite there not being people like for a climax as nail biting as that is, no one's trying to kill him. There's no explosions. There's none of the usual climactic tropes that produce that kind of drama. And yet it is a nail biter of a climax.
Yeah. Well, and Marty is trying to tell Doc about the future without telling him, and he really cares about his life.
He's trying to warn Doc about the terrorist shooting.
Yeah.
But Doc doesn't want. I don't want any information about the future.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and he tries to tell him straight out, but yeah, he again they're literally racing against the clock, and it they just barely manage to get the exact moment when the DeLorean can hit the wire to absorb the lightning bolt to get the 1.21 gigawatts into the flux capacitor and send it back to 1985. It's just damn it was absolute nail biter of a climax, and it's up there, honestly. It's up there with the original Death Star run in A New Hope. Like it's up there with how brilliantly it's constructed.
Yeah, it still raises the attention even though you know what's going to happen. Like still watching it again, it's like damn, dude.
And I got to give a shout out to the local drunk that's lying there on the bench. He does this part so brilliantly. You crazy drunk driver.
Yeah.
And then
later movies too.
Well, you have
crazy
to
drunk pedestrian.
Well, the antagonist of the whole trilogy are the various Tannen ancestors, not just Biff himself, but the various Tannen ancestors. They're the antagonists, but I think the real antagonist, at least in the first film, I don't know how many other movies can say this, but the real antagonist is time itself. And the fact that that's really what the climax is about. It's literally racing against the clock.
And versus
time. I thought you were going to say Marty because he keeps fucking everything up.
No, well, but like, think about that. Like, how many movies can say that? Not very many.
Right.
So ultimately, Doc drops him off at his house in the 80s, and he wakes up the next morning, and he's still thinking that the car is wrecked. He walks into the living room or kitchen dinette area, and he sees his brother's in a suit and his sister's all dressed up, and he's like, well, what the fuck has happened?
Hey, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
Breakfast.
What are you wearing there, Dave? Marty, I always wear a suit to the office.
Right.
So, because he changed how his parents met, he basically made their lives better.
Well, basically, it was more because he gave his father the courage to send in that novel, and now he's like a successful author. And so,
like I always told you, you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. And it's one of those. That's one of those quotes that sticks with you when you're a child. As much as with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Like it sticks with you as foundationally as something like that does.
Oh yeah. So ultimately, what do we think about the special effects of the film?
I got to see this.
Great effects. Like
they aged really well.
Right, for the most part.
What were you gonna say, Mo?
Oh, that was Brandon.
Oh, Brandon.
I was going to say, I don't know if anybody else got to see this in the 4K. Actually, no, Dane got to see this in the 4K because you had that set as well. I got the Best Buy Steelbook version. And you can tell the aging makeup. You can't tell it as much on less versions. But you can see where they applied the aging makeup to not just Christopher Lloyd, but to the principal, where you can actually see where where the stuff attaches at the neck. But the fact that it took really the 4K to see those level of details is stupendous towards the makeup, and I just thought it was really good.
I may be like in the minority. I honestly thought that Lorraine looked a little funky in that first dinner scene. I think most of the makeup was excellent, but that one maybe it was just because she was trying to play someone who's not only middle-aged but overweight, and she just really had such a
She-
small frame.
Overweight
I
and with an
forgive-
alcohol problem.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
I forgive that because
Yeah.
she's supposed to look frumpy and dumpy and all that jazz.
Right.
She's the body stay-at-home mother type that just never really went out anywhere.
That's what I'm saying. She doesn't, to me, she doesn't look like that. She looks to me like someone who's made up to look old and fat.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, but most everyone else, like between the three movies, the makeup job for Biff and for Michael J. Fox, for Marty, and for Doc, I think all three of them, I had no issues at all with the makeup between the movies. Lorraine mostly was better. That one scene was the main one I had an issue with. But for the most part, I thought the makeup was pretty good in the series. And as far as the special effects, it is worth noting that there's not a lot of computer-generated effects in this film. It is largely practical with just a few computer shots. So that's pretty impressive, especially for the time, with the stuff they were able to make happen there. Overall, I think from a visual and production also, it's important. They talked in the bonus features that I watched that they were talking about how they didn't think at the time in the early 80s, they didn't think that anyone had ever even thought of doing a period film set in the 50s because they thought it was too recent. It wouldn't really qualify as a period film. So the way that they were able to do such a strong period detail for something that was still recent memory for a lot of people, that's something that's kind of interesting. Like even today, like if you see a movie that's a quote period film set in the 90s, a lot of times people are like, is that a period film?
Yeah.
Well, I do think at
you know,
least the square of Hill Valley was a
Oh, they
period
did.
piece.
They
Because
did an excellent
even
job.
that Texaco, they had all like hundreds of like servicemen at the car
Yeah.
wash.
That's like
I mean,
Boston.
I wish that we would have that kind of service
Right.
today. You know,
Yeah.
Well, that's
Still
the thing.
full
I'm not
service in
saying
Oregon
it's a
there.
bad job. I'm saying it's impressive that they were able to do that at all because it was such a weird concept for a lot of people.
Well, it's one of those. It's one of those things that, like, so the films tend to go in 30-year cycles, and I think you really start to see that on full display. I think you probably saw some of that in like maybe a little bit in the 70s with some like of the neo-noir films that harken back to the 40s, but like you see the nostalgia train hit really hard starting from the 80s onward, and then it's like, you know, in the 80s it was the 50s all over again in a lot of areas, and so this film is kind of a prime example of that, but it's more so that it's like explicitly a period piece as opposed to like just like The Fly being a remake of the 1958 Fly and
Right.
other things that reference the 50s, and then in the 90s everything was the 60s again, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But yeah, this one, it's definitely of that period where things start to get into that 30-year cycle, but again, it's different here because it's more explicitly set in that period, but it's not quite as head scratching as like American Psycho being made in 2000, and then they are already started to look at the late 80s as like a period piece, even though it wasn't all
Right.
that long ago.
Well, I mean, again, that one came along 15 years later. Again, this was kind of ahead of its time in that, but it's kind of commonplace now. Like I wouldn't
Yeah.
say it's a,
Well,
but
Stranger
people are-
Things, man. I mean,
Yeah,
look
yeah.
at that.
Yeah.
yeah.
I do want to say in defense of the makeup and touching on Brandon's point that you know, sometimes old people do got some weird shit going on in the neck region there. I'd be
That is
looking at my
true.
dad's neck sometimes when we're eating dinner, and I'm like, damn.
skin
that's-
tags.
Now, here's
never-
an interesting thing I just thought of, which, well, but we can save it for when we do music if we're ready for that. But if you had a point, Dustin.
Let's. I just wanted to say that I liked the effects of when the time machine actually goes back in time. Like it leaves
Me
like
too.
it leaves like a flaming trail. Like, and it's
Yeah.
so unique.
Well, it's a flaming trail for the tires, and yet when the DeLorean actually comes to its destination in time, it's actually cold. It's very
Right.
cold, which I thought that's an interesting contrast. It's super hot to get back or forward in time, and then when it arrives there, it's covered in ice. And I thought, hey, that's a neat contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the double trail has become rather iconic. I think a lot of people see that and they immediately kind of at least think about the movie, you know.
Well, and you
Yeah.
wonder how the hell they're not getting caught on fire when they're standing in the middle of the flames, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Well,
in any
that
case,
was
let's talk
a
about the music.
that was a composite shot. That's how
Right.
they did that. But that does bring me to that music point I was going to make, which is that
Yeah, let's start on music because we got to start
Yeah.
wrapping
yeah.
up.
Because the
Well,
music
but
in this was pretty awesome.
the point I was going to make with the music that yes, it is indeed awesome. It's one of Alan Silvestri's best scores that he's ever done, if not his best score. But what's interesting and part of what makes the movie last in the way that it does is that this is a traditional orchestral score, despite the fact that this movie did come out in the 80s, and the 80s was the era of synth scores and really damn good ones. And the rest of the music is very heavily steeped in the 80s and the 50s as well, when it's back in the 50s. But the score is a classical orchestral score and a really damn good one. And it's just interesting that I think that helps the movie significantly because that is timeless in a way that a synth score would not be, despite synth scores at that time being really, really good. But that's just an interesting observation.
And it's a big score. I think they said it was the largest ensemble that Universal had ever put together at this point. And I
Uh-huh.
was very amused to learn Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis had a little bit of trouble getting this project off the ground, to put it mildly. They had a couple of flops before this, and apparently the film had Zemeckis and Spielberg went way back, and they had discussed this film a while back. And Spielberg was more than happy to get on board when the film was looking like it was going to happen. But for a while there, they were both thinking, yeah, it's never going to happen. But I read a very interesting anecdote where apparently Spielberg was not a fan of Silvestri's work. And Zemeckis
He was spoiled by John Williams, let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah, he kind of was. But apparently Zemeckis tricked him. Apparently they watched a scene with snippets of Silvestri's score without telling Spielberg what it was. And then at one point, the music swelled up or whatever, and Spielberg leaned over and said, "That's what we need for this movie." They were like, "Well, that's what you're getting."
Well, and Alan Silvestri really proved himself in later scores with What Lies Beneath and Castaway, and he did the Avengers films and Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, Forrest Gump.
But I mean, he and Zemeckis went on to be almost as good a team as Spielberg and Williams again.
Yeah.
And then of course we got the rock numbers, 2 original songs from Huey Lewis, and then the use of Earth Angel and Johnny B. Good. This one to me is a great example of use of music in film.
Oh yeah.
And
They didn't go overboard with the pop music or popular music,
And let's not forget some more deep cuts, like when he first enters the town square of 1955 Hill Valley. You hear Mr. Sandman,
right?
And then in the background of the diner, you hear
Ballad of
David
Crockett.
Yeah, you hear that, and it's like that again. That sets the period really nicely too.
Which is interesting that Disney let them use that when they thought the song was too creepy for them to. The movie was too creepy for them to produce.
Yeah,
I think that was amusing. And that's a fun thing about the background was that Disney wouldn't touch the movie because of the quote incest angle. But everyone else thought the movie was way too tame. They wanted all these raunchy comedies that.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that they were stuck in that weird kind of middle ground where
Well, this was during that period of 80s and like early to mid 90s Spielberg as a producer or an executive producer. During that period where he was really getting into all of these, not making them as a director, but helping them get off the ground behind the scenes of family films and family TV shows that hit that kind of middle ground where they had enough kid-friendly stuff to be kids' movies, but they had enough adult stuff so that the adults liked them. And you saw that all over the place with like these films and with like The Land Before Time, Tiny Toons, Pinky and the Brain, Animaniacs. He was involved in all those things, and they all kind of hit right down the middle of kind of in the way that like classical Looney Tunes did because he was a big fan. And that was like a very specific period of Spielberg's career, and unfortunately with children's media, we've kind of largely gone away from like that kind of hitting it right down the middle. Usually it's way too tame, and then there have been times where it's been way too much, but mostly nowadays it's way too tame.
All right, let's go into our favorite scenes here, and Dustin, why don't you tell us your favorite scene of this film?
Oh man, this has so many good scenes that it's really hard to pick.
I don't know if I can. I gotta think.
Yeah, here.
That's why I didn't go with you.
I think I'll probably say the Johnny Be Good scene. It's like, let's do something that really cooks. Oh yeah?
Yeah.
That really cooks.
This is an oldie where I come from. Like I like the little quick instructions he gives to the band.
All right, this is
Lose Riff and B. Watch
changes and try to keep up. Okay.
And like they just know this song.
Yeah.
Like that always felt like a little bit of a plot hole, but who cares?
Well, Johnny Be Good, it does derive from the blues, which that has a very clear musical history to it. So they probably.
And if you're any kind of a musician, you'll know exactly the kind of music that you'll be able to play for a major guitar riff.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just like getting back on a bicycle. You just know what to play.
Yeah.
So I don't really feel like it's really a plot hole.
Well, and those guys being of the era that they were of, like they were steeped in like what was known at that time explicitly as rhythm and blues, which of course derived from the blues, and it's like that has a very clear structure to it.
It's just that, but sped up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what formed the foundation for rock and roll, obviously.
So
who's next?
Okay, let's go with you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us what your favorite scene was for this film?
So I really liked just the setup where you've got him going and they're playing the song that just becomes iconic as far as me and the series is concerned. He's taking the skateboard, he's riding on the back of the cars, he's moving in there. It just, to me, that whole thing just sets up the whole film, and it just gets me psyched up for the series.
Okay. Going over to you, Forrest. What would be a favorite scene for you?
Oh God, it's either when Doc. God, for me, it's either when Doc first takes the DeLorean for a test run with a remote control. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're going to see some serious shit. Or when this baby hits 88, you're going to see some serious shit. Or the final when Marty takes the time machine back. Just because it's so it's such an intense scene. Yet by today's standards it seems so. Today's standards it seems so tame, like compared to like all the big loud destruction porn we have in summer blockbusters now. But it's still very simple but effective.
Okay, I think mine among when his father lays out Biff, that whole scene is always memorable to me. But I also like the leading up scenes with Principal Strickland, where he's like, "No McFly will ever amount to anything in the history of Hill Valley. Why do you think you can fill the bill?" The kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's hard to pick for me because there are many different small moments, but those are two I can pick out fairly easily. What about you, Jake? Is there a favorite scene for you?
It is really hard to pick a favorite in this one. There's again, so many little moments. We've mentioned a lot of them. Forrest just mentioned the one, when this hits 88 miles an hour, you're going to see some serious shit. I like as Brandon mentioned, some of the musically powered moments of the film. One that I don't think we've mentioned yet that we gotta mention. I do need to. I think we should give a shout out. Even though it was kind of an awkward spot for the franchise, this was an early role for Crispin Glover as George McFly, and he did a good job in the role. Apparently, he and the producers had some disagreements that resulted in him being written out, basically, of the final part of the trilogy, as best they could. But while he was there, he did a good job. And one of the great moments, one of my favorite lines in the movie, is when he briefly gets a bit of wind to his sails, if you will, and he's in the diner.
Yeah.
He pulls his hand out, and he's like, "Lou, give me a milk."
Chocolate.
Yeah.
Yes. That was
Live it up today.
Fucking great. I love that. And then of course we totally forgot the line soon afterward, which is "I'm your density."
Your destiny.
Yeah, he kept saying,
I'm
"I'm
destiny."
density.
Yeah. Because my family and I would quote that all the time.
Right. Those good times.
What about you, Mo? What would be a favorite scene from Back to the Future that you could take?
Well, outside of the general, running theme of at the beginning of Doc, fully contributing to the delinquency and endangering a minor by inviting Marty out at 2 a.m. to the mall on what I'm pretty sure is a school night while he knows that he's being pursued by terrorists that he ripped off a bunch of plutonium from to test a high-speed fucking time machine. Definitely the skateboard chase. We didn't even get to talk about that. We're a bit crunched for time here, and there's just so much to talk about with this movie. But it cannot go unsaid how badass that skateboard chase is, and deadbeat and shit, and all that stuff,
Especially on a board of wood.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Did we mention? We didn't mention Biff running into that
manure
truck. One of the running gags of the series.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be my hands down favorite. I mean, all the quotable stuff is great, but that's, obviously we touched on it a bit at the beginning, really had a huge influence on me as a kid. And I mean, in addition to inventing rock and roll, he basically invented skateboarding, because box scooters is kind of where the stuff came from, and surfing. So, a cool nod to the actual history of skateboards as well in a lot of this.
Oh yeah. Okay, now coming to you, Dane. What would be a favorite scene if you could take one from this?
I think I whittled it down. So I don't know if the whole climax of actually getting the car to go, and hit the wire and to get the lightning to transfer all that. I think that's just one of the most perfectly written climaxes to any movie ever. Now that's a whole series of things that happens all in one sequence, but as far as a singular scene, it's a scene that for whatever reason it's really sticking out to me at this moment in time, but it's right after Johnny Be Good, when he says his final goodbyes to the younger versions of his parents, and it's like, thank you for all your advice, I'll never forget it. And then he turns to leave, and he's like, by the way, if you guys should ever have kids, and one of them, when he's 8 years old, accidentally sets fire to the living room rug,
Go
go
easy
easy
on
on
him.
him. Yeah. Which I don't know why, but for whatever reason, that's really jumping out at me. And I think it's because it's like those little things that happen in childhood that are so small, and yet they can have a really powerful impact on the way that you grow up, for better or for worse. And it's like, if you could only go back and get your parents to ease off on you in whatever spot, then it might have helped you to not be so traumatized or whatever. For whatever reason, that stuck out to me. And then, of course, the line that ends that scene is Marty, such a nice name, so that he kind of inspires his own name. Now, one thing that I do kind of wonder is if his mom, 30 years later, looks back and goes, "Gee, Marty looks an awful lot like this one kid that I knew back when I was in high school, but I didn't fuck him, so I know that he's not, his kid or whatever." But you know what I mean? It's like, does she ever not wonder, like, gee, he looks an awful lot like that one kid? But yeah,
Well,
that whole scene, it's such a small little thing, but it's like that does cement the fact that, well, obviously they are going to go on to be his mother and father, but also it's just that idea that, this is his chance to have just a little something be better for childhood him that
mhm,
wasn't there before.
mhm.
Oh yeah. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I think that will be it for our discussion. So, thank
Mhm.
you for listening. It's been a pleasure sharing our thoughts and feelings on this film, and hopefully you'll be coming back to the future with us on
Mhm.
our next episode as we continue the Back to the Future franchise. So stay tuned.
Marty, you got to come back with me. Where? Back to the Future. Because remember, it ends all of a
Yeah.
sudden with that,
Yeah.
so we got to keep the
Uh,
audience in suspense. It's your kids, Marty. Something's got to be done about your kids.
what do we become assholes or something?
All right, night, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned
Yep.
for future sightings.